Okay, let's call the meeting to order. And go ahead and do a roll call
So John Bridges,
here.
Molly Olson,
Here.
Don Clements, Joe Morlock,
Here.
Francisco Stoller, Lonnie Parrish, Josh Duder,
Here.
Cassandra Olvin.
Here.
Okay, so we were sent out the March 22nd minutes. Hopefully everybody had a chance to look those over. I didn't see any corrections, but I would open it up to the floor to find out if anybody indicated that they saw some things that needed changed. Okay, and it does look like Fran sent a chat and said he is here, so you can mark him as being a participant at this point.
Okay.
And then I would entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar, which is approving just those March 22nd minutes.
Second.
Okay, looks like Cassandra seconded it. I did not hear it first.
Oh, I so move. There we go.
Okay, thank you.
She's just more forward thinking.
Yes.
Sorry, John. I thought you made a motion. So.
I can't make a motion. That's the one downside to being in charge, is you can't be that much in charge. All right, so with a motion and a second, all those in favor of approving the consent calendar?
Aye.
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 Great. All right, so moving on, the best way to introduce why we're here today, and I really appreciate everybody's willingness to jump right onto it. So when the mill changed their circumstances, they've gone through a series of, I think, at least 3 or 4 consecutive appeals of their valuation, so that each year the Yamhill County tax assessor sets the valuation and then the mill appeals it, and has been successful in lowering the valuation virtually every year, I think, since it's become non-operable. The most recent appeal concluded recently, and the county decided not to appeal to a higher authority, essentially accepting the valuation down there. And effectively, I'll turn it over to Doug, but essentially what it does is it reduces the value, which reduces kind of all of our different numbers for the whole life of the plan. And ultimately, it means we have to shave off $5.7 million on the project list. But Doug, I'll turn it over to you so you can kind of give a rundown on the numbers and confirm whether I'm right about that.
Thanks, John. So Elaine and Nick and I got together in an alley and had some conversations last week in regards to CDC's tax appeal and the consequences from that. We talked about some different options and the different numbers. And so Elaine has put together a memo that explains that. So Elaine, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can explain the numbers, and then you can turn it back over to me and we'll talk about options.
Sure. So this has been a circumstance that we've been considering and worrying about since the inception, because we knew if they filed an appeal or if all of that value left after we had formed the Urban Renewal Agency, that would put us in a negative position right away. So they moved quickly enough to actually file the appeal this year, but we didn't have all of the information until we ran our second round of financial data. It's my understanding that the value that they appealed to is actually the value that it was sold. So I don't believe there will be another appeal of value. Maybe as some equipment starts moving, but then new value ought to be also coming. So when Nick Popenick started rerunning the financials, they had to use the new numbers on that property. And by plugging in those new numbers, it resulted in a $15 million lower frozen base than was projected for this year. So when you're projecting your growth and the 6.5% growth that we looked at over the years, it loses, you lose money because you're doing that calculation on a lower number to start with. So, and yes, so somebody. So in the memo, it talks about what that reduction means in terms of maximum indebtedness and overall capacity. So the maximum indebtedness goes down to $106,400,000. The capacity in 2020 dollars goes down to $56,100,000. And then we also broke that out in 5-year incremental periods. So when we spoke with Doug about alternatives for what we do at this point, regardless of, we just gave him the full range of opportunities. And one was increasing the length, the duration of the area. One was, what was the other one? Increasing the direction. Oh, and two of the potential were expand the duration or to increase the SS value growth assumptions, which already we were kind of pushing the envelope on those. So Doug said he didn't think either of those were acceptable ways to proceed. And then if we're going to make the plan actually meet the financial requirements of an urban renewal plan, what we have to do is reduce monies allocated to projects by, like Doug said, about 5.6 point, a reduction of about $5.8 million. So Doug then looked at the projects and actually talked with the mill site owner about some of the transportation projects, and I'll let him jump back in, and has recommended a couple of projects that would accomplish that, and want to go over that with you, get your input from it, and see if those changes are acceptable or not, or if you have other ideas on how to reduce that amount of money. So hand off to Doug.
Thanks, Elaine. So would it be helpful if we had some visual maps? I included maps in your packet, but if you'd like us to have a visual on the screen, Sue has a PowerPoint. Joe's got a thumbs up for a visual. Cassandra is smiling. Don's got a thumbs up. All right, Sue, if you could pop open the slides. All right, next slide, please. So with the conversation we had, I circled back to CDC. Is they're working through putting together what their concepts of the two NorthSouth Roads industrial streets on the mill site property. So the first one's on your left, which kind of goes from the Bluff Road up towards the bypass. And the second one would connect between the East Road and down to the Bluff Road. And they indicated that those two roads in their preliminary concepts are not necessary. It creates some more usable development space for what they're trying to achieve. It would allow a bigger site up on the north of the east-west road, and it creates a better, from their perspective, development opportunity south of that east-west industrial street. It still leaves the east-west street in place to get trucks and so forth in and out of the mill site. It leaves the Bluff Road, which was a community value component as part of the Riverfront Master Plan. And it leaves in the Winooski Street, which is another key transportation piece as part of the freight route. And with all of these roads comes the underlying infrastructure So the east-west Bluff Road and the Winooski Street. So those projects in 2020 dollar values came to a little over $3.2 million. So then it was, well, where do we cut the other, $2.8, $2.9 million? So looking through the plan and going back through your 14 months of discussions and looking at the priorities and the several months that we spent working through the project list. Sue, can you go to the next, go down about 4 or 5 slides. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep a couple more, one more. Okay, Blaine Street, one back. Thank you. Blaine Street. So we looked at that and what that project encompassed. And I know from the conversations at the very beginning was the issues about some high density residential, which is really driven a lot by underground infrastructure. So it's the sewer and water components of that. And so we looked at that one and said, oh, we could reduce that project value. It doesn't go to zero. Recent number I saw, a preliminary number I saw from Nick was somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 would still remain in Blaine Street to address some of this underground infrastructure that was identified. So with those two, it brought us pretty close back into alignment with our $5.8 million reduction. Now, that what it does leave in place, and so Sue, if you could go all the way back up to that first slide we were just on, and I'll walk through. Sorry about that. Okay, down, one more. I'm keeping her busy tonight. So it still leaves the Esplanade in place on the mill site, and conversations I've had is that that's viewed as an asset. If you have 300 to 400 employees who are working there and having that opportunity to take your lunch break and go out and walk along the Esplanade and get your exercise, that's a positive thing. Next slide. It keeps in place the River Street from the bypass south and the rail crossing. And we know the rail crossing is going to have to be improved in order to accommodate redevelopment on the mill site. It keeps that 14th Street component in place. And so that's that road project, and it again has underground infrastructure. Next slide. Keeps the multi-use trail and Esplanade in sub area B. Again, so that comes directly out of the riverfront plan, and that's a value for the commercial area at 14th and Waterfront Street and future residential on the south side of the bypass. It all then ties into the park area that's to the bottom of the screen from Rogers Landing all the way off of the screen to your left for that park and open space. Next slide. Keeps in place the wastewater infrastructure in that pump station. So it's always important to note on this slide that there are areas south of the bypass will actually drains back to that pump station, and that force main that goes off to the left, use my right, your left, my right, to tie back into our existing infrastructure. Next slide. Keeps in place South Blaine Street extension and the connection back into College Street, and then the College Street improvements from 9th Street down to 14th Street and its associated infrastructure. Next slide. Keeps in place River Street from 9th to the bypass. And so again, River Street is one of those primary access points. The previous slide was Blaine Street as one of those access points to get into the riverfront area. Next slide. Keeps in the portion of River Street from 3rd to 9th. Next slide. Reduces the funding on Blaine Street, as we've already talked about. Next slide. In the downtown area, it keeps in place all the blue, which is all these water line improvements that are strategic for infill and redevelopment to occur. Keeps in the partial funding for the intersection at College and Hancock. The 2 traffic signals at Blaine Street on 1st and Hancock. keeps in 2 parking lots in the downtown area. We drew a cloud around it rather than trying to identify a specific property. Don't want to do that until we get to a stage of doing that. Next slide. And then the last piece in the downtown is the 2nd Street from Grant to River Street. And that's that undergrounding of those overhead utility lines to promote that residential development along that 2nd Street corridor. So looking at all this, if you started to piecemeal away little bits and pieces of some of these other projects, then it raises the question if they were even feasible or not. So that's how I came up with my recommendation of dropping the north-south industrial streets in coordination with the property owner and reduction in the funding on Blaine Street. Questions?
So Doug or John, whoever,
Go ahead, Molly.
what's the impact on the Blaine Street of what aren't we doing?
It's a lot of sidewalk work
Okay,
along that particular roadway. A little bit of curb to curb improvements. And so again, is that I don't have a final number yet, but that leaves that $200,000 to $300,000 for water and wastewater in order to address redevelopment to try to get some of that high density development along Blaine Street. That was one of the roads where we already have a curb to curb width in place. It was the underground and behind the curb improvements. Brett, was there anything you would add to that?
No, that covered it pretty well.
okay, thank you.
Other questions? So I have a kind of a series of questions on actually this screen that's up. How much is the 2nd Street utility undergrounding gonna cost? Wasn't it several million?
It was about a little over $1.8 million.
And could you just remind me what you're trying to get for that?
So you get those overhead lines that are primarily on the south side of 2nd Street. They all go underground. So if you're trying to do vertical mixed use, if you're trying to do vertical development and go multi-stories, which is what we're trying to achieve in the downtown area, we've had conversations with TVF&R, and if you get over 30 feet in height and their aerial apparatus, they can't work through the electrical lines and all the telecommunication lines. So as an example of a project would be the one at Edwards and 2nd Street, the 3-story apartment project. Part of that requirement is they had to underground the overhead utilities along the frontage of their property. And I can say there were some very long discussions about the cost of doing that. So in order for our public safety to be able to get in and address their response needs to that, that's where we identified that undergrounding to occur.
So is there a kind of a something in between? Like you don't do the whole thing for those property owners, but instead of, I can't remember what your number was, but maybe you set aside a third of that amount of money and you create a grant program so that if a developer does want to do a project, you have an ability to be part of the undergrounding cost, but developer has the other part. Like it sounds like they did the whole undergrounding costs in the example that you gave.
Yeah, well, it gets more expensive when you do it lot by lot rather than our concept is you come in and you go from River Street to Grant Street, you'd underground everything, you get all the conduits, all the vaults, everything gets in place for where it needs to go. If you do it on a lot by lot, then you'll have situations where you'll have poles, then they drop underground, then where do you position all of your vaults and all of your other infrastructure, telecom boxes and so forth. So yes, John, you could approach it that way. Past experience has taught me if you do it piecemeal, it gets more expensive.
Yeah, I get that, but you balance that against the fact that you guys have to pay more money than a private developer does. Because you've got to follow the Davis-Bacon Act and all that good stuff.
Yes, we do have to follow Davis-Bacon and Boley requirements.
I I just was trying to think if there's either, what's a fair trade-off? I've never seen a tremendous value in this Second Street concept just because, I don't know, I haven't seen it. And if we're not gonna do anything on the surface of Blaine Street, is that going to be an attractive place to try to develop? Because I always think of Blaine as being really a difficult road to navigate.
Well, Blaine would not, and Brett, correct me if I'm off base, but the curb to curb width of Blaine does not change. The railroad tracks are going to continue to be down the center of the road for redevelopment opportunities in the mill, on the mill site itself. So it's those improvements that are on the back side of the curb.
So we weren't going to do anything to try to make the surface better to interact between the crazy railroad tracks down the middle of the road.
That was already done. So the city came in and did a project and did paving down Blaine Street. And they actually worked with the former mill owner at that time, who had an obligation under their franchise agreement to do all the paving work between the rail lines.
Okay, I had hoped that there was going to be some sort of improvement there, but it doesn't sound like that would have been part of the project anyway.
That sounds right, John.
Okay. So what's the group's thought? Are you just comfortable with what the recommendations are? Or are there other questions or ideas on how to do it, how to split up the $5.7 million differently?
I'll go first
Hey,
if you
John.
like.
Oh,
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't really have another option or opinion type of thing outside of the recommendation. So that's kind of where I'm at.
All right, Molly?
Yeah, John, first, Doug, I'm thrilled. I was ready for a vicious food fight, and I'm so glad we're not doing that. So that's great. I'm also wondering, hopeful, fingers crossed, probably wishful thinking. We have infrastructure plan dollars that will get earmarked and roll out. And I don't know to what extent things like sidewalks on Blaine could be managed with dollars not coming from urban renewal, but from somewhere else. So I'm really appreciative of the fact that it's coming out of somewhere that we might be able to remediate with other dollars. There, that was long-winded. Sorry. I really love what you did there.
All right, anybody else want to say a comment?
This is Cassandra. I think it makes good sense. And like Molly, I appreciate the work that you did to carefully evaluate reductions, and I support it.
All right, well, it sounds like most people are generally in favor of the recommendation. And so if that's still the case, I didn't invite someone to make a motion to adopt those changes.
I'll make the motion if you second it, Cassandra. Oh.
Sure.
Can I formally make a motion to adopt the changes proposed by Doug for the reduction of $5.8-ish million?
Yes. All right, and Cassandra, you want to second that?
Yes, may I please second Molly's motion to support the reductions as depicted by staff?
Sounds good. Does anybody have further discussion? All right, not seeing any or hearing any, I'll go ahead and call for a vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Anybody opposed indicate by saying aye as well. It's kind of a standard Robert's Rules deal. All right, sounds like it was.
Were they supposed to say nay?
No.
Really? Oh my
Yeah.
God.
I say it's all about PC, right? We don't want to make the people who are voting no feel bad because they said a negative word as opposed to saying a positive word.
I will live with your judgment because I have to chair the budget committee and I didn't know that.
Yep, it's the way to do it. Okay, so I think we've made the decision. I believe it was a unanimous decision in favor of the motion. And I think that is all the business we have. I suppose we do have to say, are there any public comments? Because we're running a public meeting.
No, there are no public comments.
Okay, and then items from the staff, nothing further?
I will only briefly say, started the outreach with all the taxing districts in preparation of the confer consult process. So everybody got their emails over the weekend. I got emails back this morning. Why were you working over the weekend? But that's okay. So we're getting those all scheduled up, and I'm building that list now that I will share with Elaine as I solidify things here over the next several days. And this will allow us now to have Nick go ahead and finish the financial modeling and all that information that needs to go into the report. And Elaine is cranking along on the draft plan. So your next meeting is May 24th, where we will bring the final draft documents to you for your review. And we will be looking for a vote and a motion and a vote at that meeting to move us on to the next step.
All right, any items from the committee members?
Doug, just to follow up on your note that you sent out over the weekend while you were not recovering from your work week, that everything should be good for our originally intended date for you to visit with our board.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll be scheduling that Tuesday of next week. So we'll put that on our agenda for building the agenda. Make sure we get you on as well, Doug.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
All right, Don, do you feel obligated to jump in and tell us when you're going to be scheduling him on the report?
Come on, Don, slacking.
He's smiling, so he's hearing me. He's just not unmuting his microphone.
I can say that in the feedback from CPRD, we are looking at their board meeting on the 24th of June.
Okay, excellent. Okay, he's shaking his head. He's now unmuted, so that's good.
Is that good with you?
Yeah, that is. Thank you. All right. Any comments by any of the item or committee members? Okay, just before adjourning our 30-minute meeting, I'm going to say that we're also doing public presentations. We've done City Club. We've got some Rotary presentations scheduled as well. So we're getting the word out that we're interested in feedback. And you know, at our last public meeting, we actually had a fair number of comments, questions, and participation. So it's a good deal. All right. Hearing nothing further from anybody, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, guys. See ya.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
You guys.
Hey, Joe.
Thank you all.
Can I send you an email on a separate topic, public art thing?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. That's faster than now.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.